Can England beat France, and how, Mark?
Yes, they can beat France. Of course they can. It looks like a pretty close game to me between a French team that is not as reliant, say, as what Argentina are on Messi, but still, fairly feels like if you do stop Mbappe, then that goes a long way to beating them. England have scored a lot of goals at this World Cup. They look like they've got options off the bench. I think it's that there's that negativity that comes from a certain section of England fans that will always look for bad things in the tournament, but you could pick holes in everybody that's played, I think, so far and go, well, that wasn't a good 45 minutes. What happened there? So you can. How they do it, I've spent too long since we knew we were playing France working out how to sort of stop Kylian Mbappé. And it suddenly realised today that it's not my decision whether Gareth Southgate goes over back three. I was going, well, if you go over back three, you do double up on Mbappé. I can see the advantage of that. But then if we go 3-4-3, we lose a man in midfield, and then Griezmann might be spare. And, if we go 3-5-2, then of course you match up in midfield. You've got the cover for Mbappé. But then, you've only got the two up front, and in that formation, the fullbacks is always an easy out for the other team. And if you give Theo Hernandez loads of space, then he can give the ball to Mbappe. So you're better off just, going 4-3-3. And it's Gareth Southgate's decision, not mine. I personally would stick with the 4-3-3. I wouldn't change just for Kylian Mbappe. I think you have to trust Kyle Walker to do his job. Henderson, when he plays for Liverpool, is used to covering that side because of what Alexander-Arnold does, in terms of going forward. And I think the best way of beating France is actually not to sort of hold on for 120 minutes and try to counterattack them, but to play to your strengths. And I think England's strengths, is to release Bellingham from that midfield, to play with Foden and Saka and Kane as the front three, and test a French team that's not keeping clean sheet. So I would be sort of more aggressive, but I do understand why Southgate might go to a back three.
In that game against Senegal, it looked like we weren't great at playing through the midfield. And we had success when we sort of drew Senegal a bit towards us and then knocked it over the top. And I'm obviously a huge fan of this type of football, but there is no shame in it. And do you think England actually would be smart to be a bit more direct against France? Possibly,
yeah. Although I think Philippe said it in the previous podcast that actually France they're a bit French out of position. They kind of go, okay, we're not going to try and win it back really quickly. So yeah, no, it's a really interesting, as Mark was saying, decision. I think politically, Gareth Southgate can't change to a three at the back, because then if England lose, then everyone will point to that. Whereas if they lose with the kind of same formation that has been relatively successful, there won't be so much outcry. It's going to be difficult. I think England can win. Will they? That's another question. I think but France, as Mark alludes to, they're not infallible. They have weaknesses. And as he said, they've not kept a clean sheet at this tournament yet. They can be got at. And Hernandez is pretty gung-ho. He likes to go forward. Koundé is not a traditional right back, and you never know, we might see a Rabiot performance instead. So he's been pretty imperious actually so far. So it's possible.
I did have one question, Robin, for you about Rabiot, which was from Martin saying, Robin, commentating on France, how close did you get? It must have been going to your mind when Rabiot had it.
Beforehand, I was like, can I shoehorn this in? I get a few ways from the GFW massive. I was so close, but unfortunately, he's been really bloody good.
Lars, how do you see this going?
Well, I'm intrigued. I mean, I completely agree with what Robin just said about how politically it's difficult to even consider going to a back three. But I hope Gareth Southgate doesn't care. I hope he sort of picks what he thinks is the best team. I mean, if you look at the sort of biggest and maybe only sort of big tournament win England have had against a really strong opponent under him, unless I'm misremembering something, it was against Germany in the Euros, and he did then go to a back three. And presumably Southgate knows if he gets knocked out in the quarterfinals in this tournament, he's unlikely to stay in the job anyway. I mean, he should just go forth and do what he thinks is right. But I do agree that I think you probably have to fight fire with fire a little bit with this French team. I do think if you sit back and just try to defend and just hope Mbappe and the lads don't hurt you, they will. Whereas if they have weaknesses, this French team, and we haven't seen them really tested in that regard yet, it's that. Listen, that left flank, there's a reason Deschamps never trusted Theo Hernandez and insisted on using his far more defensive brother, Luca Hernandez. It's because Theo Hernandez doesn't defend that well. And he's this sort of very, very attack-minded left back who's not particularly interested in what's going on behind him. And in front of him, of course, is Kylian Mbappé, who isn't exactly a wide player who's going to track back a lot because that's not what he wants to do. So that whole flank is really vulnerable when you have the ball. And I do wonder if it's one of those where actually, instead of cowering in fear what they might do to you, you should see it as an opportunity to really hurt them down that side when you actually have the ball. I mean, on the other side, Ousmane Dembélé is not exactly the second coming of Dirk Kuyt on the other side either in terms of tracking back. So there is some vulnerability off the ball with this group, I think, and they've just not really been tested in that regard yet. So I really think England would do well to be brave here. And I also think the nation, I mean, again, maybe Southgate cares about this, maybe he doesn't. I think the population will forgive England from going out if Mbappe just runs wild and scores a couple of goals and is the big player of the tournament. But I don't think they will forgive them if they sort of go into the testudo formation and try to become very defensive. And I don't think that's what people want to see.
I do also think that the obsession with Mbappe, and I sort of had that obsession myself, is an issue for England if they do overcompensate for Mbappe, because Lars mentioned Dembélé, who hasn't been as effective as Mbappe, but still pretty dangerous on that side. And, you know, on the few occasions that Senegal did get to run at Harry Maguire, it wasn't particularly pretty for England. And I do wonder when Dembélé cuts in off that flank and sort of gets into full flow, whether that could end up actually being just as big an issue for England in terms of stopping that Dembélé sort of slalom run that he likes to do. And if Gareth Southgate is thinking of going to a back three, I would suggest Trippier on the left-hand side, because Dembélé coming in, you know, I think you do negate a lot of that threat with having somebody that can sort of shore up that area. And I think Alexander-Arnold, for instance, could play as the right wing back. I don't see Southgate doing that, but I'm just saying it. I wouldn't just worry about Mbappe, because Dembele's a threat. And somebody needs to look after Griezmann, because he's quietly having a very good tournament. You know, he's doing a lot of going unnoticed because of how great Mbappe's been. But I've been very impressed with what Griezmann's done so far.
I'm intrigued by this notion that Langdon has fallen prey to Mbappe mania, and the question of how you stop him. Because in my mind, like, do you have the kind of, you know, in detective shows and stuff, when you have sort of slightly neurodivergent main characters, that they end up with a big sort of wall of like evidence and posters, and like this is draw some string from one bit to another. I think does Langdon have a big Mbappe wall at home?
Not a big Mbappe wall, but just a very small figure of Mbappe on my work desk.
He's always there, waiting.
Staring at him. It's your nemesis, isn't it? One day I will get you. What's interesting, Robin, isn't it, is most of this discussion has been about how England stop France. And I don't know if that is a curiously English thing, or that's just how you look at a tournament from you're going, oh, he's good. And we haven't really said, how do we attack? What do we, I suppose we know our strike force is good, but like, I wonder if that is just how you're programmed, or it's much easier to look at the things, go, how do we stop that? How do we stop that? But actually, we are really good going forward. And Bellingham, if he is released, and if it's Saka and Foden, that is really exciting. And if it's, I presume it will be, but who knows? But that is just, I don't know. It was an interesting thought I had listening to this first 10 minutes.
Oh, I think it's definitely an English perspective. Everyone who I've spoken to who kind of is supporting England are saying, no chance, we've got, but I think that is a very English mindset, because actually I think most journalists covering the tournament from other countries are scared of England, and that's it. It feels weird as a kind of England fan to be in that position. But no, I think people as you say, we've got an amazing front line against Senegal. It really started firing. You saw Harry Kane doing what he does, dropping deep and really, picking up really good spaces. Foden, Saka, and Bellingham. I mean, I don't think there's much better than that. And yeah, you've got to kind of negate, obviously, the clear threats that France have, but that's without, kind of shackling what England have.
And I quite like the balance that Southgate has ended up with the 4-3-3 thing and adding Henderson to the mix. Now, I get that a lot of people would want Henderson to go away and instead of him to one of these many sort of wide attacking characters that England have in there, maybe an extra Grealish or when Sterling rejoins the squad and Mount in there, something like more exciting. But the thing is, having both Henderson and Rice in that midfield means that Bellingham can be Bellingham and doesn't have to worry about sitting around and can actually be free to move forward and do the things. And you still have a bit of extra solidity there. So I actually think that's a good, it's a good balance to that team, I think.
And I think that's the point about what Mark brought up about Griezmann, because he picks up these spaces. He's kind of almost sacrificed himself, but he's really difficult to pick up. So I think the likes of Henderson and maybe particularly Rice will be so important in trying to stop him. And then, Bellingham can do the damage. The other question I had, Lars, was who is the second coming of Dirk Kuyt? That went unchallenged.
Is it Richarlison? It's quite bold.
That's actually not a bad shout in terms of bringing energy. And I'm not sure Dirk would have ever done that head dribble move against South Korea. I think that was slightly beyond him.
Dirk Kuyt is not the second coming of Richarlison. It doesn't work. It's not a sort of. It doesn't work both ways. I guess there is a question then, given how well Griezmann's playing, Mark. And I don't think I would play Foden and Saka, but you could. There is a case for Mason Mount, who obviously currently is the sort of social media. He's a hopeless footballer. He clearly isn't, because he is defensively super smart up there.
I think that would be like one step too far, really, because you do need to offer more of a threat sort of going the other way, because one way of stopping Mbappe would be for England to have the ball themselves and to put France on the back foot. So I think, while Mount has some qualities, and particularly off the ball and the work that he does off the ball, I don't see this being like a game where England start pressing France. And Robin alluded to earlier about France sit backs. England will do the same, I would have thought, out of possession. The one area where you mentioned Mount there, I think if this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if it went to extra time, England's strength in depth, and I wouldn't have thought this a year ago, is stronger than is better than France off the bench. The options that England have got compared to Didier Deschamps, because of all the injuries, I would take that England bench, particularly in the attacking third, all day long. So that, this, I think you should plan for a 120-minute game rather than just a 90.
With this whole Mbappe conundrum, one of the things I immediately think about is my very formative summer with John Anarisa in Malta, when I had spent a lot of time with the former Liverpool fullback. And one of the things he said sort of randomly in conversation when we were talking about the football and stuff is that he had this personal principle that the bigger the name he was up against on the wing for Liverpool, the more he'd get forward. Now, in hindsight, I wonder what Rafa Benitez thought about that, and whether those were his actual instructions. But privately, he always took to the field if he was coming up against someone really scary. His idea was, I'm going to attack even more than I usually do. His idea being that this guy is terrifying going forward, but I can run more than him, and he doesn't want to track back at all. So I'm going to force him to use more energy going back than he wants to. And if he doesn't, that means I'm going to have a lot of opportunities down that flank. And I do wonder if that's something like adopt the Risa doctrine down the flank there with Walker or Trippier or however you do it.